Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones and you're listening to the Write More podcast. There's been an odd thing in television in the last decade or so. The injection of vast amounts of streaming money combined with HBO kind of raising the production value expectations of TV with stuff like Game of Thrones prompted a shift in the types of stories being told. For all the excellent shows that have been produced as a result, there's also been a collection of oddly paced shows that manage to feel simultaneously too slow and too fast, where characters never quite click and plots feel convoluted, and the pacing is simply off. The Star Wars Disney Plus shows, for my money, are especially prone to this. My personal theory is that a lot of the creative teams think of the format as a long movie, rather than as an episodic television show. Eric Kripke, showrunner on The Boys, addressed this back in 2022, and here's the quote. "As a network guy who had to get you people interested for 22 fucking hours a year, I didn't get the benefit of, oh, just hang in there and don't worry. The critics will tell you that by episode 8, shit really hits the fan. Or anyone who says, well, what I'm really making is a 10-hour movie. Fuck you. No, you're not. Make a TV show. You're in the entertainment business." End quote. I think you can agree that I completely nailed the way he talks there. Anyway, I've written about TV in more detail before, and I'll put a link down to that in the show notes. But today I'm more interested in how a similar kind of debate exists for serial fiction and how it relates to other forms such as the novel. And a quick preface to all of it before we continue. None of this is intended as a diatribe on what you should or shouldn't do. Publish whatever you want. That's the beauty of controlling your own publishing route. A good story is a good story at the end of the day. Okay, so the serial versus the novel. And, okay, versus is perhaps a little hyperbolic. It's not a zero-sum game. So first, let's think about the fundamental differences in how they function. Not so much in terms of storytelling, but in practical terms for the reader and how they encounter the story. So a novel is a singular object, is complete at the moment of release, self-paced in that the reader controls when and how quickly they want to read it, and it's immutable in that it isn't going to change after publication. Whereas a serial is comprised of multiple objects, it's incomplete until it finishes its run. The pace is controlled by the writer, who determines the release schedule. It's fluid in that previous, potentially, and upcoming chapters can be edited and adjusted even while the serial is already being published. Where this gets interesting is that once a serial completes its run, it then takes on many of the attributes of a novel. So does that mean that a serial is simply a slow-release, chunked-up novel? A novel in waiting? Well, sometimes that's exactly what it is. So let's talk about publishing a novel in serial form. A common approach is to take the manuscript for a novel and publish it in serial form. One chapter of the novel equals one serial instalment. If your primary goal is to write a novel, this makes a lot of sense. The manuscript is written as a novel, and the serial publishing is essentially a promotional act prior to the release of the book itself. The most common approach is to complete the manuscript prior to beginning the serialization. It's not impossible to write live to the page, but that does run the risk of missing out on the traditional benefits of writing a novel, things like redrafting and structural editing and so on. Being able to see the whole finished thing before you put it out into the world. This is loosely the approach I took with my 2016 serial, The Mechanical Crown. It was the second complete rewrite of an earlier manuscript, designed with the pacing of a large-ish novel. Chapter length was influenced by the serial form a little bit, but otherwise I considered it a novel released in parts. The Mechanical Crown is currently only available on Wattpad, but I'm hoping to rescue it from there and publish it more widely later this year. So then, designing a story as a serial. That's the alternative. It's to embrace the publishing mode and allow it to directly influence the story itself, rather than simply chunking up a novel into serial instalments and put them out one at a time. A project that is serial first is sort of designed to fit the form from the start. So what does this mean practically? Instalments are designed with the serial format in mind, in terms of pacing and structure. The aim is still to deliver a good story, of course, but also to bring people back week to week. Not a consideration that a novel has to have, because the person's already got the book. A closer comparison is to episodic television instead of the novel. Pacing and structure is more like that of a TV show, with the audience returning each week, hopefully. The idea of a chapter is deprioritised somewhat. The story chunks are designed around individual posts, paying close attention to word count. Individual instalments are self-contained and satisfying to a degree, while also building the main narrative. The same way an individual episode of a TV show should be a satisfying viewing experience by itself, as well as when considered part of the whole. Structurally, the overall narrative is looser. It is designed to make it easier for readers to hop on board at any point, rather than always reading from the beginning, as with a novel. The pacing is designed to work with the weekly release schedule. Instalments begin and end in a way that makes sense of that built-in release pattern. This can potentially be more satisfying for readers compared to a chunked-up novel that may start and stop in a less designed manner. This is the approach I've taken with my current serial, Tales from the Triverse, which I've been publishing via this newsletter. The serial is defined by individual, mostly standalone stories. It's a police procedural for the most part, with each story a new case being investigated by the detectives. A single storyline might be made up of half a dozen individual posts. There's also a macro narrative layered on top of the individual stories that's building up a larger story in the background. Stories have their own beginning, middle and end, and the point of view character shifts frequently. One storyline might focus on Zoltan Kaminsky, but the following story will move the POV to Lola Stiles. It's an ensemble cast, more in the tradition of large television casts rather than the perhaps tighter focus that you'd expect from a novel. Serials that are designed to be serials also have a flexibility in how long they run. I could have kept Triverse spinning for another 5 years if I'd wanted, adding more cases for the detectives to investigate without ever advancing the main plot. It wouldn't necessarily even need a main plot. Think of how sparse The X-Files was in terms of its larger conspiracy storyline in the early years, or consider a traditional cop drama which lasts for 10 plus years and simply keeps going for as long as the creators and audiences remain engaged. I'm also writing live to the page, creating it as I go and publishing new chapters once they're completed. This is also much closer to the process of writing television. Ordinarily, Season 2 episodes will not have been written at the point when Season 1 episodes are being produced. Back in the 90s, when seasons consisted of 22 episodes, the season could be on the air while later episodes were still in production. Point being that there's a live element to the writing process. The story is still forming in real time and can still be influenced by new ideas, new events, or even reader feedback. There's inherent risk, much more so than publishing an already complete novel manuscript, but also a huge opportunity to keep the story current and relevant. The project can keep evolving and explore a huge range of themes and subjects without feeling aimless or tangential. For readers, when done right, they have the added excitement of experiencing a story that's still hot from the forge. This kind of serial is custom built to fit the form, whether it's being published via a newsletter, on a dedicated serial platform, or in a magazine. And once the serial is complete, you then have the option of reworking it into paperback and ebook form. That won't necessarily be a one-to-one compilation process. It might need further adapting to make sense. Tales from the Triverse leans heavily into being an anthology of stories, which works well as a serial, but could seem quite fragmented as a novel. I may well cut out stories which don't contribute to the main thrust of the story for a future novel-shaped version. Any cut material could always be repurposed into a separate Other Tales collection. Ultimately, it is always about the story. Some stories will better suit a particular structure and style. Tales from the Triverse, as written, would make for a weird novel, but it fits neatly into a serial form. I do think it's important to make a conscious decision about this before you start writing and publishing. If you're writing a novel, with the serial publishing being a bonus or a promotional aspect, that's fine. And if you want to experiment more closely with the serial form, you need to know that up front and construct the story and cast of characters accordingly. So when making that decision, here are some questions to ask yourself. 1. Do you have a main protagonist or an ensemble cast? 2. Are you telling a tight, singular story or a series of episodic stories? 3. Are you writing the entire manuscript ahead of time? 4. Is your pacing and structure defined more by the chapters of a novel or the instalments of a regular serial? And 5. Can readers hop on at any point, at least theoretically, or do they have to read from the beginning? Your answers to those questions should help you direct one way or the other, but as always, there's no wrong way of doing it. as long as you're writing. Thanks for listening. You can find lots more along these lines over on the newsletter at simonkjones.substack.com.